If you enjoy the Victorian steampunk aesthetic as I do, you may be particularly interested in this story. Today we look at Sloss furnaces in Birmingham, Alabama, and the cases of Joseph Webb and Robert Jowers.
Confederate Army Colonel James Withers Sloss began work on his pig iron smelting factory in 1881 and opened it the next year. Though he'd had little formal education, by virtue of his keen business sense, he used the profits from his family's plantation and general store in Athens, Alabama, to invest in the Louisiana and Nashville Railroad, becoming president after the Civil War, and persuading them to extend the Decatur arm to Birmingham. He planned to convince folks iron could be locally produced from the coal, limestone, and iron ore found in Birmingham mines. He installed 2 Whitwell blast furnaces on 50 acres. These were 60 feet tall and 18 feet wide and extremely efficient for the day, producing 24,000 tons of pig iron in their first year of operation. The 2 steam-powered blowers had 84-inch cylinders and weighed 85 tons, and they called it pig iron because the workers cooled the iron in trenches shaped similar to a sow feeding piglets. Sloss's efforts were so successful, he virtually transformed Birmingham overnight. His iron went into the production of most materials of America's industrial age, from wagons and pipes to cars and military aircraft during both World Wars, earning Birmingham the moniker the Magic City. He's a legend. In a segregated Jim Crow society during the decades following the emancipation of slaves, Sloss furnaces provided jobs to many African Americans, enabling them to avoid sharecropping. From 1925 to 1940, an African American man named Alonzo Gaines worked for Sloss and is reported as saying, "I used to look forward to going to work because I could work beside a white man and he would talk to me like I was a man instead of an animal." However, working conditions in the factory were less than ideal. Workers shoveling coal into ovens experienced environments reaching 130 degrees during the summer. They had to swallow salt tablets to avoid severe dehydration and loss of consciousness. The foreman blew whistles like lifeguards do to warn of possible hazards, and for this reason, workers weren't even allowed to wear ear protection, and you can imagine the decibels reached at a place like this. It didn't take long after the place opened in 1882 for workers to get injured or even killed. In November of 1882, 2 employees, Alec King and Bob May, were tasked with cleaning residual coal and ore burned into the brick walls of furnace number 1. When they were lowered into the interior of the furnace, these materials still smoldered. They became dizzy, most likely a result of carbon monoxide poisoning or the methane gas, and the 2 fell to their deaths. Within the same week, a gentleman named Samuel Cunningham committed suicide in the same furnace by going to the top of the stack and jumping. His co-workers watched in horror. The New York Times recalls a scaffolding collapse inside one of the ovens on February 4th, 1892, as 8 men were working on it. The 8 men dropped 58 feet to the bottom, leaving 2 dead and the rest in critical care.
After the first deaths, employees started embellishing upon these tales, presumably as a way of sticking it to the man. But I want to separate fact and fiction here to honor the dead and their families. A lot of junk journalists, like ghost hunters, have taken the folklore and run with it in order to write clickbait, sensationalized stories to boost their ratings. You know the ones.
On the night of August 3rd, 1897, a painter for one of the Southern Railway shops in the city went to a bar. He was a married white man named Joseph F. Webb. and before he left, he was reported in the New York Times as having stated he was headed home. He'd bought a new pair of shoes that day, one for himself and one for his wife. This will be important later. The next day, a young boy discovered the shocking remains of Joseph F. Webb in a large open water tank at Sloss furnaces. The article states in graphic terms, the body was cooked and the flesh fell off in chunks as it was drawn from the vat. Oh gosh, I can only hope the boy was able to heal from the trauma of seeing that. Knowing he'd been at the bar and that the furnace was somewhat out of his way from the direction of his home, some of his friends suspected foul play, but no further reports could be found, so it's unknown if Webb was murdered or if his death was accidental. 2 pairs of shoes were found floating in the vat with his body, leading some folks at the time to think a woman had fallen or been pushed into the tank with him. Hopefully the lady's shoes they found were the pair he'd bought for his wife. If someone mentions Sloss furnaces in this day and age, there's a good chance the ghost of James Slag Wormwood will be on their lips. Slag is a Victorian Gothic villain concocted by the locals. They say he was a night shift foreman at Sloss around the turn of the century who wanted to impress his boss, so he ruled with an iron fist. Pun intended. He supervised 150 workers, and locals say he got 47 killed. Legend says Wormwood was on the catwalk inspecting the highest blast furnace, lost his footing, and fell into a pool of molten iron. Many are quoted as believing disgruntled employees pushed him, but of course no investigation was done. Wormwood's death ended nighttime work at the plant. In an article written by Kyle Cobb Jr. of Last Gasp's Paranormal, he believes that the slag legend was born from the tragic death of Richard Jowers, also known by his fictitious name Theophilus Calvin Jowers, who didn't actually work at Sloss. On September 9, 1887, Jowers, the likable assistant foundryman at drbrain, coal and iron, on the other side of Birmingham, was repairing a melting bell at the top of their Alice No. 1 furnace, when he lost his footing and fell. The workmen tried to use a glass pipe and piece of sheet iron to retrieve his body, but only found small parts. According to stories, the heartbroken workers band together to help Richard Jowers' widow and children. They built them a new house, routinely gave them money, and would buy sandwiches from Mrs. Jowers for lunch to help provide for her family. Through the power of this community, the Jowers family never went hungry or cold. Sloss furnaces operated from 1882 until 1971, when the Clean Air Act and foreign competition closed it down. During those years, many similar accidents at factories and plants around America would claim lives. The Pemberton Mill collapse of 1890, the Triangle Factory fire in 1911, and many others. Sloss's accidents and deaths were a product of the time and the technology available, or rather not available, for the safety of its workers.
Sloss lay abandoned for 10 years until a group of artisans reclaimed it for metalworking and teaching. Now people eat cheese, drink wine, and have their weddings there. It's a very important part of Birmingham culture. Thanks for watching.